Good morning, everybody. Sorry about that. I'm sitting here talking and there's nothing going on. So, I am still really getting used to this interface here on YouTube, and I apologize for me vamping on for like a minute without any sound. Actually, it's really quite embarrassing. All right, so let's get started. So, the over the weekend, I hope you all had a good weekend. And before the weekend, I talked about the situation in the interbank rates and LIBOR and all of those and all the dollar liquidity issues that I feel are beginning to brew in the marketplace. And nothing is going to change for this week because we're looking at the first FOMC meeting from chaired by the new Fed chair, Jerome Powell, who's most likely going to raise interest rates. We've got a number of other things happening. And I think the biggest thing on that front this morning is this announcement that there's a deal on Brexit. For at the very least, there's a deal in place, or the framework of a timetable in place to say that, hey, the EU and the UK have agreed on the timetable and how they're going to go about allowing the Brits to finally leave the EU. Don't believe it. To me, this looks like nothing but another way of making the markets less jittery about what's actually happening. The EU's not going to give up on its goals of betraying Brexit, and the May government is not going to do anything to improve the situation because she was put in power to betray Brexit. So I want to caution you about that. I think that this is not going to. Good morning, guys. How are you? I don't think that we're going to see anything materially change here. In fact, the way the news this morning out of Brexit, this deal that that negotiators have been able to put together, almost feels like an extension of what I was talking about in my article that I published yesterday, which hit both Zero Hedge and Lou Rockwell and Russia Insider and a variety of other places. That is that when things get serious, then the lying starts. And we're at a point now where the lying has gotten so thick and so egregious that it's almost like they're incapable of telling the truth at this point. Because once you've built a web of lies so enormous, how do you ever go back to tell the truth? So I don't even believe that there's anything happening here in Brexit negotiations that's going to end well for the Brits, because Juncker and Tusk and the rest of them and Merkel and the rest of them don't want the Brits to leave the EU, and they know flat out that they can't function they can't function financially at this point without the largesse of the Brits, because the Brits pay in an insane amount of money every year. And because of that, it seems to me that the best way of going about seems to me that any positive news that you hear about Brexit at this point is a lie. It's the only thing that makes any sense. And so this morning we've got, the British pound is up a few pips, and the euro's up a few pips, and this is simply another way of just gaslighting the markets to tell them that there's nothing, that they're not going to betray this, and there's not going to be any major dislocation. Now the markets like that. The markets prefer stability. They prefer the status quo to be maintained, because and one of the things I pointed out over the weekend is that when you have the amount of money that's at stake here, trillions of investable dollars around the world, doesn't know where to go, doesn't know what to do. When political instability begins to hit, and the currencies and the currencies are reflective of the political instability or stability of the issuer. So markets cannot stand political instability of this type. This is why they were overjoyed that Merkel was able to cobble together a crappy coalition in Germany, right? That's why they're worried about whatever Salvini and company are going to do in Italy, right? And so, we really have to, you have to be cognizant of how much money is at stake here, and how much the markets don't want the political status quo blown up. And this is what effectively, in many ways, gives cover to these people doing the worst things imaginable. And it almost gives them if you want to be generous, it gives them the impetus and the excuse to betray the people because, well, oh my God, you don't understand how bad things would be if we allowed Brexit to go through. We can't allow Brexit to go through. If we allow Brexit to go through, the markets will crash. And do you know what would happen to your pensions? Because it's all this Faustian deal that we've made with these freaking people. And when the truth of the matter is that a growing number of people, both in the United States and in Europe, understand that the system as currently is constituted needs to be torn down. Not in some fit of destructive, nihilistic rage, right? That's what's happening on the left, right? That's what the left is doing. They're wanting to tear down their opposition because they don't believe in anything. What's happening in the populist moves in Europe and the United States is not this drive to tear everything down out of a hatred of society and hatred of other people. It's actually wanting to tear it down because it's the only viable option in order to have a functioning society 20 years from now that doesn't wind up with people getting gassed in a world war. Because that's where we're going and that's where we're headed if we continue down the current path. And that's what Brexit's all about. And it's a major threat to those who are in power. Speaking of a major threat that's to those that are in power, let's talk about Vladimir Putin's re-election in Russia. Not that this was in any way, manner, shape, or form unexpected. Not that Putin wasn't going to win by a very large margin. What I think is interesting is how solidly the U.S.-backed opposition to Putin was rejected by the people of Russia. Turnout was close to 70%. Now, 70% in Italy is a low turnout. 70% in Russia is a high turnout. I think in 2012, I think the numbers were something close to 63%, 62%, something like that, which is still high compared to Western standards, where barely half the people in the United States even give a shit about showing up to vote. Which, by the way, as an anarchist libertarian, I kind of agree with the sentiment. But when the stakes are really high and you have a clear choice ahead of you, you get out and vote. I did. You get off your high horse, you come off your rhetorical mountain, and you vote. When you have a clear choice, when you have to choose between two globalist cucks, well, you stay home because it doesn't really matter. I got better things to do with a Tuesday. So then affirm, some horrible person versus some other horrible person. When you're forced to choose evil advances. Okay, so. But in Putin's Russia, or I didn't say Putin's Russia, in Russia, Putinism, or Putin, whatever you want to call it, is not only just popular, it's dominant. Because they understand, because the Russian people understand fundamentally what's at stake, what the situation is, and they don't trust anybody else in Russia to lead them through this period. And they're very smart. And this is incredibly smart on their part. And it's not just a man. I mean, in the West, 55% is considered a mandate. 55% of the voting population, of the people who bothered to come out to vote, which is usually around 45 to 50, anywhere from 45 to 55%. So less than 22% of the people chose this particular person to lead them, and that's supposed to be a mandate. Whereas in Russia, we literally had 50% of the people come out and affirm that they want Putin to lead them. And the lying legacy media is so far up the asses of all of the intelligence agencies and the hostile governments to the Russians that they can't even let go of this idea that Putin didn't win this election fairly. I mean, the communists got 12%. I mean, the opposition parties in Russia got 24% of the vote. It's actually more than I expected, to be honest, knowing the situation. And for 4 years, I've been having people tell me that Putin's approval numbers aren't anywhere close to the 80+% that they keep talking about. I'm like, okay, what, 75? Give me a number. 75? 72? 65? What do you think those numbers are? Because they can't fundamentally believe that people aren't like them. That someone with Putin's effectively paleoconservative value system, because that's the way he governs Russia, as kind of a paleoconservative, very similar to Pat Buchanan, and would have here in the United States. I think that's the closest analog, honestly, to Putin, is Buchanan. And what I find fascinating is that those who were opposed, I hate to use the word left, but it's really the best word I could use at this point. The political left, the progressive left, the Marxist left, whatever you want to call them. The water carriers for the globalist oligarchy. What the hell you want? I don't really give a shit. Those people argue that there's no way that Putin could have such a high approval rating. I'm like, really? And then we get an election like this, and so all they're going to do now is scream, election fraud, this, that, and everything else. Aside from the fact that you could have watched the polling stations, in major polling stations in Russia, on the internet yesterday. Excluding the fact that the city of Moscow is testing out blockchain-based voting in order to minimize voter fraud. They've embraced that for the Moscow mayoral elections, and I think they might have even extended it to certain precincts in Moscow, because I heard noise about this in some of the election coverage that I read about for this election. So they may have been just testing it. Doesn't matter. They're moving in the right direction, because the blockchain is a perfect way to stamp out voter fraud, because truly one person, one vote, it's been verified, unless the blockchain is, editable. But if it's open source and the results are and the algorithms are checkable by the public, then you have a free and honest election for all that matters. So you have that. You have major election monitors. They're all there. It may have been a little voter fraud, but, it's like everything else. At the end of the day, elections are really only probably, at best, they're only probably accurate to about 1%. That there's going to be 1% of schnock, right? Just people. There's going to be human error. Between human error, both honest human error, dishonest human error, outright cheating, all of it. I figure somewhere around 1%, maybe even as much as 2%. And that when the election is close, it's hard to figure out who the winner actually is in a first past the post majoritarian election system, right? That makes sense. So, but in this case, that wasn't the case in Russia. So there's going to be complaints that it wasn't perfect. Well, no election is perfect. The United States elections aren't perfect. We've got rampant voter fraud everywhere. The Democrats and the Republicans are so desperate to cling to power and seats and funding and this, that, and everything else, that the amount of voter fraud that exists in the United States is epic. It truly is epic, and it's actually quite rich that we accuse other people of election fraud, or even worse, meddling in other people's elections. Because let's not kid ourselves. I think people like Ksenia Sobchak and Navalny, Alexei Navalny, and whatnot. These are all U.S. NGO/CIA-backed opposition candidates designed by the United States to attempt to overthrow Vladimir Putin. It's just money being pissed down the toilet. It's actually really, as taxpayers, we should be outraged. We got such. If you're going to spend money to influence an election, spend money and win the election. But don't pound sand up a rat hole, and don't piss my money away. At the very least, get me some return on my investment. How many millions of dollars did we blow into affecting the Russian election, only to have it result in less than 4% of the vote? 2 election cycles in a row, by the way. This is the second time we've done this, and it's not working. So I fundamentally don't understand why it is we do what we do, considering that the results are so poor, because the results are poor. But what this means for Putin going forward is it gives him every necessary bit of support that he's going to need going forward to confront the West, who are now putting on the full court press for war, and nothing less than full and total war with the Russians. Do I believe that that's actually going to come to pass? No. Do I believe that cooler heads will prevail? Most likely. Do I believe that the people who are like cornered rats, cornered snakes here in the West? Do I believe they're attempting to take us to total war? Yes. Do I believe a lot of them are going to go wind up in jail? Good question. It's a good question I don't have an answer to. But I refuse to believe that humanity is doomed. Fundamentally, this is one of my. I mean, if you can tune this out immediately if you want to. I refuse to believe that we're as bad as the Marxists say we are, the nihilists say we are, the postmodernists say we are. I refuse to believe that. I actually don't believe that people are that bad in any functional way. I actually think people are fundamentally really quite amazing. And it is only the most egregious people who set policy for the rest of society. Again, I refer to this all the time, the chapter 10 of The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek, Why the Worst Get on Top. It's a mechanistic argument. And if you have not read at least chapter 10 of The Road to Serfdom, you don't necessarily need to read the rest of it. You just read chapter 10. And I'm serious. Hayek's dry. I don't really recommend the whole book. But I recommend chapter 10. Because these are the people who, when you have positions that have the ability to use power, those positions are going to tend to be filled by people who want power. And therefore, over the course of time, you're going to fill those positions with only the most ruthless people. You're going to fill them with psychopaths, with sociopaths. If you institutionalize these positions and these institutions, if you allow these institutions to persist from generation to generation, that power will be handed down through the ages from one sociopath to their psychopathic children or friends or whomever. And over the course of time, the level of corruption in society can do nothing but grow. And then eventually wear down the resistance of the people who are, of the moral people within the society, who see that acting morally doesn't get them ahead. And eventually this is why societies eventually fail. And this is why I'm fundamentally against government. Because it is a corrupting process. It is the vector by which corruption grows. And so it's where we are today. And we're at that spiraling out of control situation. And Putin and the Russians and the Russian people voted yesterday to stand athwart that process. They've lived through it. They get it. They don't want it. It's not what they want. And they understand the consequences of it because they've lived through it. Many of them have. The wounds of the USSR are still very deep. In the same way that the wounds of World War II are still very deep within the psyche of Jewish people. And others who were, like Albanians and others who were wiped out by the Germans and others in World War II. It's hard to argue that the people of Russia have not suffered more than any other quote-unquote ethnic group in the last 100 years than Russians, of all breeds and creeds, because Russia truly is a melting pot of a number of different societies, religions and ethnic groups and cultures and everything else. And so Putin rules Russia with a very firm but even hand. It's not perfect. It's got a lot of work to do. He knows that. That's where he's pointing the country today. And we'll see what happens over the course of the next 6 years. I'm actually, as an investment advisor, one of the things you look at when you look at a company, and you can always look at their balance sheet, and you can look at their product, and you can look at, are they making any money? You can look at their profitability, their balance sheet, their this, or that, all their financials, and they can all look at all this technical stuff and where the stock is going and everything else. And none of that gets to the heart of the story, because leadership is actually what will determine for you whether or not the company is a good long-term investment or not. If a company has good leadership, the company will eventually do well. May not be the best investment in the world, but it won't be the worst. It probably won't lose you money. It may not make you a fortune, but it's probably not going to lose you money. The first rule of investing is don't lose money. When I look at the United States and the squabbling between the Democrats and the Republicans and the unbelievably corrupt deep state, and I look at Russia, and I look at the amount of corruption that still exists, but is getting lowered, but is being lessened every day, because the economy in Russia is improving. The people's fortunes are improving. Life expectancies are improving. Consumer sentiments improving. Business investment improving. Distance to the frontier from Moscow and St. Petersburg improving. Life expectancies. Deaths due to accidental alcoholism, suicide rates, all improving. Abortions as a percentage of live births, dropped like a rock since Putin took over. These demographic trends, birth rate is positive. These demographic trends point to strong leadership. They point to not a perfect leadership, but strong leadership. Leadership that was capable of stabilizing what was a societal collapse. It's pretty impressive. You can give Putin as much of that credit as you so choose. You can criticize that he hasn't done enough. He'll probably be the first one to agree with you, which is why he ran for re-election. But if I had to put my money in two places at this point in time for a long-term investment, not a short-term investment, I'm not talking about the next 18 months to 2 years or anything like that. I'm sorry, I'm putting my money on Russia, because they just voted for the guy that not only saved them, but is setting them up for a multi-generational bull market, a multi-generational growth path. Whereas the United States' political system is fighting with every erg of its being to maintain control over a system that's failing. We still are dominant, so our assets are still important. The value of our assets, the disposition of our assets, and how our assets correlate with the rest of the world and everything else. We're still a core economy, as Martin Armstrong would like to say, and all of those things. I'm not saying sell the United States. As a matter of fact, I'm actually quite bullish on equities right now. But I'm not bullish on equities because I'm bullish on the United States. I'm bullish on equities for other reasons. I'm bullish on equities because I'm bearish on Europe, because Europe's political leadership is terrible. I look at Europe's leaders, I look at our leaders, I look at Russia's leaders, and I say, yeah, Europe's worse. I'm selling them. Okay, when people start selling Europe, where's the money going to go? The United States. Why? Because the United States markets are the only ones big enough to handle all that capital flow. Okay, the Russians will probably get a little bit of it, as long as the United States doesn't make it illegal for everybody in the world to invest in Russia. And it doesn't matter. We're clever tool-using monkeys. We'll figure a way around it. We can suppress that money coming in as much as possible. We can try and hold the Russians back as much as possible. But, technology and time and energy and the Chinese and everybody and the Chinese factor and all these other things, we'll figure out a way for money to flow into the Russian economy over time. That's all that matters. It's not a hard thesis. Leadership's important. I would never have invested in Microsoft while Steve Ballmer was the CEO. He was the worst CEO in the history of man. No man destroyed more capital in a shorter period of time than Steve Ballmer. Elon Musk is going to run a close second, because Tesla's going to implode. But that's for a different topic for a different day. All right, last thing I want to talk about, because we're at the 25-minute mark. Let's talk about Bitcoin, because I did say I want to talk about Bitcoin this morning. Now, if you guys haven't noticed, I haven't really talked about this very much, but if you've noticed, I have. I don't really talk about it because I don't really have hard numbers on it or anything. It's just one of those things that it just pops out at you over the course of time. Mondays have not been kind to Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies since the futures markets went live back in December. Actually, they've been quite hostile. That we come out of Sunday, and there's usually news on Sunday evening, some release from some government somewhere saying we're going to do something horrible to Bitcoin. And then on Monday morning, the tail wags the dog and the markets get crushed. This happens all the time. And then the markets spend the rest of the week trying to recover from the Monday massacre. Generally speaking, if not on Monday, possibly Sunday night, possibly late Monday or into Tuesday morning, but sometime between Sunday night and Tuesday morning, there's, we're hearing, oh my God, Bitcoin's down $1,500, $2,000, whatever. Not this morning. This morning we got two pieces of good news come out of both the Bank of Japan, where Bank of Japan head Kuroda said, he has no problem with Bitcoin. Obviously, I'll tell you why, because the Japanese love Bitcoin and he can't stop it. That's why. Andy Spicer, I agree with you completely. He rushes the country from the abyss. I would vote for Putin in a heartbeat. I'd shake the man's hand. He saved millions of lives. Period. And then the last thing was the G20. Because we got the G20 finance ministers are meeting this week. Right now, as a matter of fact. And they came out and said they don't see any systemic problems with Bitcoin or any reasons to ban them or anything else along those lines. So that was enough for a lot of people to go long. Understand that the weakness in Bitcoin, I believe, is still under this. We have two major factors. We have one, it's tax season. People are, there's going to be people that are going to pay their taxes on their cryptocurrency profits from last year, especially hedge funds, especially any corporate entity or LLC that, pulled some money together and decided to buy some Ethereum and some Bitcoins. I got news for you. They're paying their taxes. They're not dumb, because those are the first people that the IRS is going to come after. Okay, not the individuals, because that's too much freaking work. It's easier to go after the corporates. They're going to pay. So there's that. So there's probably a lot of selling due to that in order to raise capital to actually pay their taxes. And then the second thing is that we do have sincere dollar liquidity issues behind the scenes. A rising LIBOR rate and a rising LIBOR OIS spread is indicative of tight dollar funding issues. Okay, central banks are positioning themselves for a liquidity crisis. They're sitting there with almost $3.2 trillion worth of treasury bonds sitting on account with the Fed in New York, just waiting to sell. This is an all-time high. It's $400 billion higher than the lowest level that we saw during the worst of the financial crisis. It's bad. That's how much money that they've parked. They've bought treasury bonds with their trade surpluses in the United States and the current account deficit that we're running. And they're converting them into treasury bonds, and they're holding them on reserve with the Fed in New York. They're not repatriating them back to Singapore or Luxembourg or anywhere else, just holding them on reserve with the Federal Reserve. That's a very important telling stat. You can see it every week on the Thursday afternoon at the Fed's H.4.1 report, which literally type in H.4.1, hit return into your search engine of choice. Mine happens to be Bing because I fucking hate Google. Not that Bing is much better, but at least they pay me to search. So, every 6 weeks I get a $5 credit at Amazon. That's better than Google. So, I may not like Microsoft, but I'll at least fund them. Yeah. So, it just becomes very interesting so when you look at the dollar funding and dollar liquidity situation, Bitcoin and gold are just not going to be strong in those environments. This is what happens when dollars are tight. People sell the nearest and easiest proxy to raise dollars. Okay, it's harder to raise. It's harder to sell. I mean, they sell stocks, sure, but Bitcoin, gold, investments like that, very few fund managers have a mandate to hold those so they can sell them with impunity. If they own any of them at all, they can sell them with impunity. And nobody ever got fired from running a mutual fund for selling gold. Period. It's just the way it is. So while the political unrest and political instability, on the one hand should be bullish for gold, on the other hand, dollar liquidity crisis dollar liquidity issues are also bearish for gold at the same time. And that's why gold is kind of range bound and really, in my mind, setting up for a plunge to 1260 or so. I'm really kind of expecting that to happen. And I would not be surprised to see, continued downside shocks in the cryptocurrency market. So if you've got cash sitting on the sidelines, just, hold your water. There's nothing burning a hole in your pocket right now to buy any of these things. So, the important part about when it comes to investing like this is you're looking for the setup for the big trade. You're looking for you're looking for the high quality setup and the high probability setup that you're going to make money. And that was last summer, honestly, in a lot of the cryptocurrencies. And it'll probably be that way this summer in the cryptocurrency. So you got a couple of months to, build up your cash reserves before you want to, start buying bottoms. Okay? We'll wait for bottoms to confirm and then move forward. And for gold, I have to wait for that one last puke. Okay? Where even good news won't raise the price of gold. Because that marks the end of a bear market. All right. So, and it'll be the same thing here in Bitcoin. But it could take a couple of months. All right, you guys take care. You have a great afternoon. I'll be on tonight on Periscope at 8 p.m. You can follow me on Periscope over at periscope.tv/Tom Luongo. You can also just follow me in the app. Just look for @Tom Luongo in the Periscope app and click the little subscribe button and you'll get the notification. Same thing here. If you like what you heard today, please give a like, give a subscribe. All those things are important for helping to reach a wider audience. I really don't care about ever monetizing this channel. I have other means of doing that. The point here is just to get the word out as far as wide as possible. You can follow my work on a regular basis over at goldgoatsandguns.com. My name's Tom Luongo. You guys have a great afternoon and keep your stick on the ice.